He always exchanged words with everybody because it didn't matter what anybody was doing in and around the estate here and everywhere else. They all meant a lot to him, and he always took a very personal interest in everything that they were doing.
On one hand, anonymous sourcing is often the only way real information about a notoriously secretive institution ever reaches the public at all. Palace staff sign confidentiality agreements, speaking on the record, even about something as seemingly minor as a mentorship offer that went unanswered, can end a career inside the household. So anonymity in this context isn't necessarily a sign of unreliability. It's often the price of getting any information out of the building at all. On the other hand, it means that almost everything in this story, the surprise, the hurt feelings, the fury over the book, the relief about the title, comes to us secondhand, filtered through people with their own perspectives, loyalties, and possibly their own scores to settle. A friend of Rosalind's describing her private emotional state is not the same as Rosalind describing it herself. It's an interpretation, however well-intentioned, and interpretations can be shaded, consciously or not, by whoever is doing the describing. This is frankly true of nearly all royal reporting, regardless of which family member is being discussed, or which side of a given feud the outlet tends to favor. The institution's culture of silence creates a vacuum, and anonymous sourcing rushes in to fill it. The result is a public record built almost entirely on inference, plausible, often consistent across multiple outlets, but rarely confirmed in the way a more transparent institution's internal disputes might be. It's easy, in telling this story, to let Marlowe's arc dominate the narrative, simply because it's the more dramatic one: departure, interviews, a best-selling exposé. But doing that risks underselling just how unusual Wren's trajectory actually was, and how much of it traces directly back to that early mentorship. By her 10th year in the family, Wren had developed a public role distinct from her husband's, something relatively rare for a royal spouse who isn't first in line. She led her own initiatives around early childhood development, drawing on academic research and building relationships with universities and health organizations that had little to do with traditional royal ribbon cutting. Several of the specialists she worked with credited Rosalind, indirectly, for the introduction. Rosalind had, years earlier, connected Wren with a handful of contacts from her own long-running work in public health advocacy. It's a small thing in isolation, an introduction here, a phone number passed along there, but those small things, compounded over a decade, are precisely what separates a royal spouse who thrives from one who struggles. Access to the right specialist, the right charity contact, the right piece of institutional knowledge about which battles are worth fighting and which aren't. None of it shows up in headlines, but all of it shapes outcomes. Wren has, notably, never spoken publicly about the contrast between her experience and Marlowe's. In the handful of interviews she's given over the years, she has consistently declined to comment on her sister-in-law by marriage, offering only that everyone finds their own way through this life, and it's not really my place to judge anyone else's path. It's a diplomatic non-answer, and deliberately so, but it also reinforces the exact persona the documentary spends 2 hours building around both women, one who stayed quiet and let her work speak, and one who didn't. There's a version of the story that treats Rosalind's restraint as an unambiguous virtue, the wise, patient royal who let her record speak for itself while others chased headlines. That's certainly the version the documentary wants you to walk away with, but it's worth pushing back on that framing a little, because restraint isn't free, and it isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just strategy. Staying silent for over 20 years meant Rosalind never had to publicly account for her own early mistakes in the same unforgiving spotlight that Marlowe faced almost immediately. It meant the which interview was that, again? Moment could be reframed years later as playful rather than pointed, simply because Rosalind never had to defend it in real time under sustained pressure. Silence, in other words, isn't just dignity, it's also a form of control. It lets you choose later exactly how your own history gets told, and by whom. That's not a criticism of Rosalind specifically so much as an observation about the institution she represents. The same culture of discretion that protected her from ever having to publicly relitigate her own early scandal is the culture that made Marlowe's very public departure feel, to many observers, like the only real option available to her. If the family's internal culture genuinely offers no other way to be heard except leaving and giving an interview, that's not simply a personal failing on Marlowe's part. It's a structural one, and it's worth asking whether an institution that rewards silence quite this heavily is actually as healthy as this documentary wants us to believe. So what do we actually make of all this? It would be easy to frame this story as a simple morality tale, the loyal, hard-working royal versus the ungrateful outsider who spurned help and left the family behind. That's certainly the version the documentary seems to be inviting viewers to accept, but the more honest read is messier and probably more interesting. It's entirely possible that Marlowe genuinely appreciated Rosalind's early kindness and simply found herself, for reasons that had nothing to do with Rosalind at all, unable or unwilling to build the same kind of relationship with the institution that Wren did. Marrying into an entrenched, centuries-old institution is an enormous adjustment, and different people handle that adjustment in radically different ways. Some by embedding themselves deeply in existing structures, others by protecting a smaller, more separate personal world. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong. It's also entirely possible that whatever tension existed had far more to do with dynamics between Marlowe and other family members entirely unrelated to Rosalind, and that the mentorship snub, while real, has been inflated in hindsight to fit a tidier narrative than what actually happened. A fictional royal drama original script, invented kingdom and characters. For years, Duchess Rosalind of Faircross played it cool. She stayed diplomatic. She smiled through the tension, the whispers, the headlines that tried to drag her into a feud she never asked to be part of. She kept the royal family's private business exactly where it belonged, behind palace walls. But not anymore. A new documentary has cracked that silence wide open. Insider accounts, unpublished letters, and years of carefully buried history have all come spilling out at once. And underneath all of it is something nobody expected: rejection, quiet fury, and receipts. This is Rosalind's moment, and she is not holding back. Today we're breaking down exactly what happened, the mentorship that was offered and ignored, the ripple effect it caused, the infamous one-line joke that became a national talking point, the tell-all book that pushed things past the point of no return, and the documentary that finally let the whole story breathe. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why people are calling this the most savage and most quiet takedown in the history of the fictional House of Aldmore. To understand why Rosalind's silence-breaking matters, you have to go back to the beginning, to a time before titles, before documentaries, before any of the tension that would eventually define an entire decade of royal coverage. Rosalind married into the House of Aldmore in 1999, becoming the wife of Prince Alaric, the younger brother of the heir. She was, by her own later admission, completely unprepared for what awaited her. She made mistakes. She trusted the wrong journalist early in her marriage, resulting in a tabloid sting that nearly ended her royal career before it began. She was mocked in the press, quietly sidelined from major engagements for almost 2 years, and forced to rebuild her reputation from the ground up, one small, unglamorous engagement at a time. By the time a decade had passed, Rosalind had transformed herself into one of the most trusted, most competent working members of the family. She wasn't the flashiest. She never had the tabloid magnetism of the more photographed royals, but she had something more valuable inside the palace walls: complete discretion. She never leaked. She never postured. She simply worked. And that made her, in the words of one longtime courtier, the only person in that family everyone actually trusted with a secret. So when 2 new women married into the family within a few years of each other, Duchess Wren, who married the future king's son, and Lady Marlowe, an American actress who married the second son, Prince Dashiell Rosalind saw an opportunity to do for them what nobody had done for her. He reached out to both. According to a longtime household aide who spoke on condition of anonymity for this piece, Rosalind's approach was almost identical in both cases. She requested a private meeting. She brought no assistant, no notes, nothing that would make the conversation feel like an official briefing. She simply asked each woman what she was struggling with, and she offered whatever advice she had for free, with no expectation of anything in return. She told them both the same thing, the aide said. She said, "I made every mistake there is to make. You don't have to make them too. Call me whenever you need to." Duchess Wren took her up on it. Over the following 2 years, the two women developed what several courtiers describe as a genuine friendship, not merely a professional alliance, but something closer to camaraderie. Wren would call Rosalind before difficult engagements to ask what to expect. Rosalind would text her small tips which photographers to avoid eye contact with, which family members to be careful around during arguments, how to handle unexpected questions from the press pool. Small things. The kind of things nobody writes down but which make the difference between thriving and drowning inside an institution like the monarchy. Lady Marlowe's response was different. According to the aide, Rosalind and Marlowe met twice, once for tea shortly after the engagement was announced, and once again a few months after the wedding. Both meetings, by all accounts, went well. Marlowe reportedly asked thoughtful questions. She seemed engaged. She thanked Rosalind warmly at the end of each conversation and said she'd love to stay in touch. Then nothing. No follow-up call, no further meetings, no invitation back to the cottage where Marlowe and Dashiell were living at the time, despite Rosalind having extended an open invitation of her own. The aide described Rosalind as surprised and a little hurt, though she'd never say that publicly, not angry, at least not initially, just puzzled by the abruptness of it. One day, there was a connection forming. The next, silence. It's worth pausing here to say plainly this is not by itself a scandal. People drift apart. Newlyweds get busy. Not every offer of mentorship needs to be accepted. And there's nothing inherently wrong with Marlowe choosing to find her footing on her own terms, rather than through Rosalind specifically, but within the tightly wound social ecosystem of a royal household where trust, access, and small gestures of loyalty carry enormous symbolic weight. The difference in how the two new arrivals treated the exact same offer would end up mattering a great deal more than anyone expected at the time. What happened over the following years is, in hindsight, a study in contrast. Duchess Wren leaned into the relationships available to her. She built alliances with the senior women of the family, not just Rosalind, but the Queen Mother figure of the dynasty, the elderly and universally respected Duchess Beatrix, who by that point had spent nearly 6 decades inside the institution and had seen every possible way a royal marriage could succeed or implode. Wren absorbed lessons from all of them. She showed up early to engagements. She learned which charities mattered to which family members and made a point of supporting causes that would strengthen, rather than compete with, the existing family portfolio. What does seem clear, though, is this: Rosalind built her entire reputation on discretion, consistency, and simply showing up, decade after decade, without demanding credit for it. Whatever happened in that first meeting with Marlowe all those years ago, Rosalind's subsequent choices to keep working quietly, rather than publicly relitigating the relationship, to let her record speak, rather than her statements, have been remarkably consistent with the persona she'd spent 25 years building. Whether that consistency reflects genuine character or savvy long-term image management is, honestly, a matter of perspective. It's probably some of both. That's really what this story is about in the end, not a scandal, not really a feud in the conventional